A warm greetings, children. Welcome to this English class. This is Sumathi, handling English for you. Success doesn't come from what you do occasionally. It comes from what you do consistently. Set your goals high and don't stop till you get there. With these words, we'll start our lesson, children. Of course, the first lesson we are going to learn is The Portrait of a Lady by Khushwant Singh. Let us see a short introduction. The Portrait of a Lady is a part of an autobiography by Khushwant Singh. In the story, the author draws a pen portrait of his grandmother. He beautifully unfolds their relationship and how it undergoes several changes. In other words, the story is a loving tribute from a grandson to his grandmother. The story gives a picture of human relationships. It is a realistic account of how the grandparents give all their time, attention, and love to their grandchildren. The Portrait of a Lady gives us a picture of human relationships in a joint family. It is a realistic account of how grandparents give all their time, attention, and love to their grandchildren. Grandparents play an important role in inculcating good manners and values in the children. The children imitate their grandparents in a positive way and learn to be good individuals. They learn important human values such as love, compassion, and respect from them. Grandparents also imbibe religious and spiritual values in children. Children thus learn to love and respect God and all its creations. They also learn about their customs and traditions from their grandparents. Many children can even sing religious songs and recite prayers. All this was a very positive role in their character development. Grandparents share their life experiences with children in order to help them handle different situations. Children thus face adverse situations with a positive attitude and learn to take challenges in their stride. They also learn to be competitive in a positive light. Further, grandparents guide children from time to time to follow the right path in life and respect their parents. Thus, the children become not only good human beings but also good citizens. Now, let us see a few words about our author. Khushwant Singh is an Indian author, lawyer, diplomat, journalist, and politician. His experience in 1947 partition of India inspired him to write Train to Pakistan in 1956, which became his most well-known novel. Born in Punjab, he was educated in New Delhi and studied law at St. Stephen's College, Delhi and King's College, London. He was appointed as journalist at All India Radio in 1951 and then moved to the Department of Mass Communication of UNESCO at Paris in 1956. These last two careers encouraged him to pursue a literary career. He served as the editor of several literary and news magazines. In 2007, he was awarded the Padma Vibhushan, the second highest civilian award in India. Let us see the lesson in a nutshell. Khushwant Singh presents his grandmother as a symbol of love, care, and affection, as well as a strong character with traditionally religious beliefs. She loved her grandson immensely. She was not physically attractive, but had an inwardly spiritual beauty. In the village, she was actively involved in her grandson's life, but when they shifted to the city, the bond of friendship was first weakened and finally broke when he went abroad for higher studies. Yet she always presented a picture of peace and contentment. Her love for animals was reflected in the way she fed the dogs and sparrows. She did not like the English school but never interfered in the narrator's education. She accepted every decision of her grandson regarding his life in a calm and composed manner. Even in death, she achieved peace and contentment. Now, going to the lesson, let us see the lesson now. Portrait of a Lady by Kushwant Singh. The author remembers his grandmother and grandfather. The author recalls his grandmother as a very old lady. For the 20 years that the author had known his grandmother, he had found her old and wrinkled. It was hard for him to believe that she had once been young and pretty and she had a husband. Kushwant Singh's grandfather's portrait hung on the wall of the drawing room. He wore a big turban. His clothes were loose. He looked at least 100 years old. Looking at his portrait, one could not imagine him in his youth with his wife and children. The author's grandmother. The thought of the grandmother being young and pretty was almost revolting to him. She was short, fat, and slightly bent in stature. Her face was crisscross of wrinkles. Her silvery white hair was scattered over her wrinkled face. The author remembered her hobbling around the house in spotless white cloths with one hand resting on her waist to balance a stoop and the other hand busy counting the beads of a rosary. Her lips constantly moved in inaudible prayers. The author, she could never have been pretty, but she reflected a divine beauty. She was like the winter landscape in the mountain. The author's childhood with his grandmother. The author and his grandmother were good friends. His parents left him to stay with her when they shifted to the city. In the village, his grandmother took care of all his needs. She was quite active and agile. She used to wake him up in the morning and get him ready for school. She said her morning prayers in a sing-song manner while she bathed and dressed him in the hope that her grandson would learn them by heart. The author listened to the prayers because he loved her voice but never bothered to learn them. Then she would fetch his wooden slate, which she had already washed and plastered it with yellow chalk. She would take an earthen ink pot and a reed pen and tie them in a bundle and hand it to the author. After having a thick stale chapatis with a little butter and sugar spread on it for breakfast, they used to leave for school. The author's grandmother always accompanied him to the school as it was attached to the temple. The author at school. The priest taught children the alphabet and the morning prayer. The children sat in 2 rows in the veranda. They would sing the alphabet or the prayer in a chorus. While the author learnt his lessons at school, the grandmother would read scriptures in the adjoining temple. On their way back, they would feed stale chapatis to the dogs. The turning point in the relationship of grandmother and the author. The turning point came in their relationship when they moved to the city to stay with Kushwant Singh's parents. In the city, the author went to an English school in the motor bus. The grandmother could not accompany him to school. As there were no dogs in the streets, the grandmother took to feeding the sparrows. As years rolled by, they saw less of each other. In spite of her immense interest in studies, she could not help him in his lessons as he was learning English, the law of gravity, Archimedes' principle, and many other such things which she could not understand, and this made her unhappy. Sometimes she would ask him what the teacher had taught them. The grandmother was distressed and disturbed. Grandmother didn't believe in the things taught at the English school and was distressed to learn that there was no teaching about God and the scriptures in the school. Moreover, she was very disturbed at the idea of music lessons being given at the English school. She doesn't like the music lessons. To her, music had lewd associations and she considered music to be unsuitable for the gentle folk. The common link of friendship gets snapped. The common link of friendship between the author and the grandmother was broken when the author went to the university and was given a room of his own. The grandmother accepted her loneliness and rarely spoke to anyone. All day long she sat spinning the wheel and reciting her prayers. Only in the afternoon she relaxed for a while to feed the sparrows. They perched on her shoulders and some even on her head, but she never shooed them away. It used to be the happiest half hour of the day for her. The author leaves for his higher studies. The author decided to go abroad for higher studies for 5 years. He was sure that his grandmother would be upset at his departure, but she was not even sentimental. She came to the railway station to send him off. She showed no emotion. She was absorbed in praying and counting the beads of her rosary. Silently, she kissed his forehead. The author thought that perhaps it was the last sign of physical contact between them. The grandmother celebrates the author's return and falls sick. After 5 years, the author found his grandmother at the station when he returned. She held him in her arms. He found her more religious and more self contained. He could hear her reciting prayers. Even that day, the happiest moment for her was feeding the sparrows herself. However, something strange happened to her in the evening. For the first time ever, she did not pray. Instead, she collected the women of the neighborhood, got an old drum, and started to sing songs of the homecoming of warriors. Then they tried to persuade her to stop, to avoid overstraining herself, but she didn't listen. She fell ill the next morning. The grandmother was diagnosed with a mild fever by the doctor, but she insisted that her end was near. She told everyone that she did not want to go talk to anyone and would rather spent her last moments praying. She ignored everyone's protest and started counting the beads in her rosary while praying. After a short while, the author noticed that his grandmother's lips stopped moving and the rosary fell from her lifeless fingers. She died a peaceful death. She was covered with a red shawl. The sparrows mourned her death. When the author and the others came to take away the grandmother's body, they met a strange sight. To mourn her death, a lot of sparrows had surrounded the grandmother's body. They were all silent. When the author's mother offered the sparrows some bread, they refused to eat and quietly flew away after the grandmother's body was carried away for the last rites. Now, the values, let us find the values highlighted in the story. Love and protect the elderly, give company to the elderly, compassion for birds and animals. To conclude, growing old is inevitable. One who is born will get old someday. The energy and exuberance of youth is replaced by the loneliness and sadness of the old age. As one's body gets old, the day to day tasks become tedious and tiresome. One starts to become dependent on others. This leads to emotional insecurity. This finally gives mental trauma to the old as they feel unwanted. They develop the thought of being a burden on others and hence try to remain away from others. It became the duty of their relatives to give them due respect. Our elders decided to their whole lives in providing us a better life. We should, our elders dedicated their whole lives in providing us a better life. We should take care of them at a time when they need us the most. However, such care has become a thing of the past. People now send their elder relatives to old age homes where they live a life of loneliness. What would have happened if they had treated us the same way? We cannot belittle their importance in our lives. It would be a shameful thing if we do not care for them in their old age. Old age is the most sensitive age or stage of a person. The old are like infants. They are unable to do most of their daily works on their own. This makes them dependent on others physically as well as emotionally. This is the age when they need full support. They need something with whom they could share everything. But sometimes it is a loneliness that kills them emotionally. It leaves them no other option but to accept this period of life silently. This also happened with the author's grandmother. They both were living together in the village, were very close to each other. After some years, his parents brought them to the city. In the city, they started to drift apart. But the old lady accepted her loneliness. She rarely talked to anyone. This shows that the old need proper care and attention from their loved ones. They are emotionally vulnerable and want someone to be always very close to them. To recapitulate the lesson, let us see about the author Khushwant Singh, born on 2nd February 1915, was an Indian novelist, lawyer, journalist and politician, born and raised in Hajali, Punjab, has studied law at St. Stephen's College, Delhi and King's College, London. After working as a lawyer in Lahore Court for 8 years, he joined the Indian Foreign Service upon the independence of India from British Empire in 1947. He was appointed journalist in All India Radio and then moved to the Department of Mass Communications of UNESCO at Paris in 1956. Kushan Singh was decorated with the Padma Bhushan in 1974, but he returned the award in 1984 in protest against Operation Blue Star, in which the Indian Army raided Amritsar. In 2007, he was awarded the Padma Vibhushan, the second highest civilian award in India. These are all recapitulation of the chapter again. In this story, the author draws a pen portrait of his grandma. He beautifully unfolds his relationship with her while describing her appearance and daily activities. Appearance of the grandmother. The author recalls his grandmother as a very old lady with a wrinkled face. She appeared so old that it was hard for him to believe that she had once been young and pretty. She was short, fat, and a little stooped in appearance. The author remembers her moving about the house in spotless white, counting the beads of a rosary while her lips moved constantly in silent prayers. She was not pretty in the traditional sense, yet her serenity made her beautiful. Initial years of togetherness life in the village. In the initial years of his life, the author lived with his grandmother in the village, sharing a good friendship. His grandmother used to wake him up in the morning and get him ready for the school. She would hand over to him these things he required in the school. After having thick stale chapatis with butter and sugar for breakfast, they used to leave for school. The author's grandmother always accompanied him to school as it was attached to the temple. It was her habit to carry several stale chapatis for the village dogs, which they used to feed while returning from the school. The grandma used to sit inside the temple reading holy books while the narrator learned alphabets and prayers in the school. Turning point of their friendship, life in the city. The turning point of their friendship came when they moved to the city to stay with the author's parents. Though they shared the same room, his grandma no longer accompanied him to the school since the author started going in a bus. As years rolled by, they saw less of each other. Meanwhile, as there were no dogs in the streets, she took to feeding the sparrows. Unlike the village school, the author was not taught about God and the scriptures, which troubled his grandmother. She did not believe in what was being taught at the school and was unhappy, and she could not help him with his lessons. Moreover, she was disturbed at the idea of music lessons being given at school, as she considered music to be unsuitable for gentle folk. Her disapproval was conspicuous in her silence. The grandmother combats her loneliness by feeding the sparrows. When the author started going to the university, he was given a room of his own. It resulted in a further gap between them. She accepted her loneliness and rarely spoke to anyone. All day long, she sat spinning the wheel and reciting the prayers. She relaxed for a short time, only in the afternoon, to feed the sparrows, who came in large numbers. The bond and level of comfort they shared with her is evident in the fact that they perched on her legs, even on her legs and head. She used to be at her happiest self while feeding the sparrows. Author leaves for higher studies. The author decided to go abroad for further studies. He was sure that his grandma would be upset at his departure. On the contrary, she came to the railway station to see him off, but did not show any emotion. She was absorbed in her prayers, telling the beads of her rosary. She silently kissed the author's forehead, which the author considered to be the last sign of their physical contact. On his return, after 5 years, author's homecoming, the author didn't find any change in his grandmother. She was as old as ever and remained absorbed in her prayers. Even that day, the happiest moment for her was feeding the sparrows. In the evening, For the first time, she did not pray. She collected several ladies of the neighborhood and sang songs related to the homecoming of the warriors. She had to be persuaded to stop singing in order to avoid overstraining. However, the next day she was taken ill. Grandma's death, though diagnosed with a mild fever by the doctor, grandmother knew that her end was near. She decided to spend the last few years of her life reciting prayers and telling her beads. Soon her lips stopped moving and she died. The family, a silent tribute by the sparrows, the family went to make arrangements for the grandma's funeral. As they came with the stretcher, they stopped midway to find thousands of sparrows scattered around her dead body. The sparrows mourned the death of the grandma in utter silence. They ignored the breadcrumbs thrown at them by the author's mother and flew away silently after the body was carried away for cremation. The breadcrumbs were swept away by the sweeper next morning. Let us see a chapter highlights. When the author Kushwant Singh was a little child, his parents left him in the village with his grandmother and went to live in the city. The author's grandmother was an old lady. She was very religious. The author shared a very close bond with his grandmother. They became good friends. The grandmother woke him up, dressed him, and accompanied him to school. The school was attached to the temple. While the author was at school, the grandmother used to read the scriptures in the temple. When the author's parents were well settled and he and his grandma also went to the city, it proved a turning point in their friendship. In the city, Kushwant Singh attended an English school and travelled in a motor bus. He learnt English words and topics of Western science. The grandmother could no longer accompany him to school nor help him in his studies. However, they shared the same room. When the author went to the university, he was given a separate room. Thus, the last link of their friendship was broken. The grandmother kept herself busy in her prayers and spinning the wheel. Her favorite part of the day was feeding the sparrows. When the author went abroad for studies, the grandma came to see him off to the station, but she showed no emotions and was not even sentimental. The author came back after 5 years and was received by his grandmother at the station. She was unchanged and did not look a day older. In the evening, the grandmother did not pray and instead collected the women of the neighborhood and celebrated her grandson's homecoming. To the grandmother fell ill, and the next day she knew that her end was near. She stopped talking and closed her eyes. She was lost in the prayers and counting the beads of her rosary. Suddenly the rosary fell down and her lips stopped moving. She was dead. Thousands of sparrows assembled in the room and sat quietly to mourn her death. They did not even eat the crumbs given by the author's mother. After the grandmother's body was taken for cremation, the sparrows flew away silently. Children, let us answer these questions. Please start answering all these questions. The portrait of a lady illustrates the impact of the village school, city school, and university on the relationship between the grandmother and the grandson. Comment. Give a brief character sketch of the grandmother using the following words: affectionate, caring, kind, strong women. Gradually, the author and the grandmother saw less of each other and their friendship was broken. Was the distancing in their relationship deliberate or due to the demand of the situation? What light does the lesson throw on Indian family values? It is said that a flame shines brightest just before it dies down. How does the grandmother's life depict this truth? Children, I want you to go through this lesson once, twice, thrice, then listen to this audio and look into this video. You'll be able to understand the lesson still more better and use all the vocabulary words which is used in your lessons so that you can score better in your board examination. All the best, children. Thank you very much.